Kids often ask me, who's the most famous person from Needham? And I think right now the answer would be Sunita Williams. But for most of our recent history, I think the answer would be NC Wyeth, the artist. There were really two sides to Wyeth's family. His mother's side, the Zerngiebel side, were recent arrivals. They came from Switzerland only about 20 years before he was born. They were really the artistic side. His grandfather, Dennis Zerngiebel, was a florist, he was a botanist. His father's side was the practical, hard-headed business side. The Wyeths had been in this country since the 1600s. They threw tea into Boston Harbor. They fought the American Revolution. One of them went out on the Oregon Trail. His father, Andrew Newell, was very pragmatic. He was a businessman. He had a hay and feed business in Charlestown. And he was not at all in favor of this artistic career. He just thought, this is not what grown men do. You're going to be a farmer. NC did not want to be a farmer. NC's mother did not want him to be a farmer. NC's mother wanted him to be an artist. He started drawing as a very young child, and he really wanted to go to art school. So his mother went looking for art schools, and the first one he attended was a school for drafting. It was called the Mechanical Arts School in Boston. He didn't like that. It was very technical, and he transferred to the Massachusetts Normal Art School, which is now the Massachusetts College of Art and Design, and he liked that a lot better. But he was looking for something else, and then he went out to private teachers, and he went from teacher to teacher because he really wasn't finding what he wanted. This was causing problems at home because every time he changed teachers, his father had to shell out to pay for them, which was only reinforcing his father's notion that artists were shiftless and bohemians who needed money all the time. Finally, he ran into a friend who was all excited about this new teacher he had in Wilmington, Delaware, a guy named Howard Pyle. Howard Pyle was, at the time, the most famous illustrator in the country. And the guy said, this is a great guy, you really should talk to him. So Wyeth did, and he was really interested. He sent a portfolio, and Pyle accepted him. So just after he turned 19, he moved to Wilmington, Delaware, to the Howard Pyle School of Art, and that was essentially his departure from Needham. A few years later, when he married, bought himself a farm in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania.
At the turn of the 20th century, printing technology was going through a revolution. These changes made it possible for artists like Wyeth to become more commercially viable than ever.
This is the golden age of illustration, and he started getting these jobs. Even while he was still in art school, Pyle had taught him, he called it living in the picture. You have to be the picture or it's not going to be convincing. If it's not happening to you while you're painting it, you're not going to sell it to the audience. He had to go west, and he was a Pony Express rider for a few weeks. He learned to ride a Bronco. I mean, he really felt that you couldn't illustrate a guy bussing a Bronco if you haven't tried it yourself. I mean, he did ads for all sorts of products, soap and soft drinks and cereals and washing powders. Wyeth made a fortune in illustration, but it never really made him happy because he always felt that illustration was at the demand of somebody else. You may have a concept, but the guy's got to have a Coca-Cola bottle in his hand. So it wasn't really until later in the 20s, when he had made plenty of money, that he really started experimenting with what he considered, art. He experimented with a bunch of different styles. It's kind of, we associate him with this kind of lushly colored realism, but he started experimenting with Impressionism. He started experimenting with Surrealism. Oddly enough. He started experimenting with different points of view, bird's eye views, three-quarter views. He did public murals.
NC Wyeth had traveled far from Needham, but keen-eyed observers can notice subtle hints in his art that he never forgot where he came from.
He used Needham a lot in his illustrations. The Zerngiebel house, it's the house that Paul Revere's riding past in Paul Revere's Ride. The Admiral Benbow Inn, Old Blind Pew, Treasure Island, is his parents' house. A very famous painting that he actually did two versions called The War Letter, which shows a couple sort of standing together reading a letter home, and it's his parents in their backyard. He's constantly recalling these pieces of Needham, and essentially like Easter eggs. The family referred to it as homesickness. Homesickness was a sort of late 19th century term for depression. But he really was homesick in a lot of ways. He would go out on his porch in Chadds Ford every night and, face toward Needham and think about being in Needham and like, what would I be doing now if I were home and what would my mother be doing? In 1921, he decided that he had it, he was going to move back. So he up stakes, grabbed the family, they came back, and at that point, his grandparents had passed away. He bought the Zerngiebel house, his grandparents' house, lived next door to his parents. The mother, at least, was still alive at that point. Put the kids into the Harris School, the same school he went to as a child, and they hated it. The kids, they'd never lived in Needham. They didn't know anything about Needham. His wife, Carolyn, didn't know anything about Needham. They wanted to be back home. And he wasn't happy either because his view of Needham was 20 years, 25 years out of date. The town was changing a lot, and a lot of the things that we complain about now, pieces of land being turned into McMansions and that kind of thing. The same thing was going on. Old farms were being sold and broken up into house lots, and it was driving him crazy. This is the same thing he thought was happening in Pennsylvania that he was running away from was, worse still happening in his beloved Needham that he thought was still a farming village. And they lasted 2 years, and they went back.
NC Wyeth would live in Chadds Ford until his death on October 19, 1945, at the age of 62. But his legacy continues to this day, not only through his own art, but through his children and grandchildren.
His son Andrew is the most famous of his painting descendants, and then Andrew's son Jamie Wyeth. But his daughter Carolyn married a guy named Hurd, who was also an artist, and they were both artists. Among his grandchildren's generation, there are several artists. It's really a dynasty of painters. I'm happy to say that both the Zerngiebel house and the Wyeth's house right next door are both still standing. The Zerngiebel house was purchased a couple of years ago and turned into the NC Wyeth Foundation and Reading Libraries, which means all sorts of good things. The house is going to be preserved, and when ready, it's going to be a research collection, not a gallery, not a painting gallery, but an extensive research collection of materials about Wyeth and the Wyeth family of artists.